guys, this is Wolfie D from PG-13. Check out my podcast, Live and in Color with Wolfie D, every Monday at noon. We're talking Memphis, we're talking ECW, WCW, WWF, everywhere that I've been. We even have some great guests, some Hall of Famers on the show with us. Every Monday at noon, Live and in Color with Wolfie D.
Hey everybody, welcome once again to the Jackson Interaction Podcast. I'm your host, Gene Jackson, and excited about tonight's show. We are steering away from our usual topic of wrestling. I'm not going to say we might not talk about a little bit of wrestling because my guest tonight is a fan of it, so who knows? We may sneak some wrestling talk in there. But right now I want to welcome my guest, comedian Jonathan Craig, although it's not really fair to just call you comedian anymore, man. You got all kinds of stuff going on.
Yeah, man, I've been wearing a lot of hats lately. So it's been a fun trip. I've always, done comedy for like 10 years, but branching out a little bit, getting in the music industry a little bit and trying some new things.
Absolutely. And I was going to kind of hold this off to later in the conversation, but man, right there behind you is something really cool on the wall, man. You got to tell us about that before we get too deep into this.
Yeah, man. So this is my my home office, and I got a lot of posters from when I did comedy and stuff. Some of that's up there, and then the newest edition is the gold record for "Save Me," the Jelly Roll song. Some people may be familiar with. When he was in the studio recording it, I was there that day, and he was like, you know what? If this thing does well, we get a gold record. Everyone that's involved here in the team gets a gold record, and he held true to that. So that's pretty awesome.
That is awesome, man. I mean, that's by all accounts, from everything I've heard, man, Jelly Roll is a really good dude, and it's awesome to see good things happening to good people, and not just him, but you as well, and. We were talking about right before we went on the air, man. You guys have put out been cranking out some awesome videos. You're not just with Jelly Roll, but just you've been working with a few different artists. Yeah,
I mean, it's true. Jelly's super nice, funny guy. I mean, in his own right, as far as comedy goes, he can hold a story. He can we've got him up at Zany's a couple times, and he's gotten a bunch of laughs. Since I've been working with him, and yeah, I mean, and then we just grind, ever since I joined the team, we've been dealing with the whole pandemic stuff, and the whole world went in lockdown. We just kept pushing through. We were put out a bunch of content, a lot of, little vlog stuff and little, small clips of different things we're doing. And then more importantly, music videos for all the content, that he releases. And then we started working with a few other artists. Viking Barbie's one. Then Still Matthews, and a bunch of other people like that, some country artists we work with as well, just putting out a bunch of videos. We've done probably between 30 and 40, probably closer to the 40 number by now.
Wow. And
they haven't all been released. Some of them are still waiting, and then that just keeps it exciting because you're like, all right, it's this one's turn. This one's going to be a pretty awesome video. So it's just been fun, and I look forward to what we're doing this year. We got a lot more cool stuff happening.
That is, man, that's awesome. And I mean, I can only imagine how cool that is creatively. I know, from the comedy perspective, which we're going to get into here in a moment, of the feeling of, writing material and coming up with jokes and then getting on stage and getting the reaction. But knowing what all must go into these, having seen a lot of these videos and knowing what all has to go into them, to be sitting there from the time they go from a concept to making it happen and then seeing people react to it and hearing people's thoughts on it. That's got to be really cool from a creative aspect as well.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And one thing I've learned from the music industry that's different from comedy is, in comedy, when we come up with an idea for a joke or something, we can't wait to like rush and hit a stage and put it out there for, the only way that we get feedback is to tell it live the first time,
Right.
and work on it. And with music, it's a little bit different. It's more, use your peers a little bit more with these ideas for the songs as Jelly's recording them. We'll be in the studio with him and, we'll give him some feedback, whether he uses it or not. That's up to him because he knows what's going to work. And, we mostly it's like, yeah, that one's awesome. That's the majority of what's going on because he's always put out good stuff. But while we're in there, sometimes we're jotting down ideas for like, this song's so cool. Here's an idea for a music video. And then we'd start, putting some of those, not just ideas on paper, but then you find the location, you get the props, you get actors, and all that kind of stuff behind the scenes. That's kind of like what my job is. And then there's, a budget, a certain amount of money they want to spend on the video. And then I just got to make sure it stays within that budget and that we still get to do some cool stuff. So
that's awesome, man, that y'all kept it rolling during the pandemic because, I mean, that was key, getting content out because people were just at home just searching for content. So what better time to be able to keep cranking content out? So that's awesome. So I guess really to get to more of what we're here for today, or tonight, I should say, stand-up comedy. I mean, the way me and you met, well, actually the way I met you was at Zany's in Nashville, but it actually was a live show of Tony Schiavone's there with Conrad Thompson and Cassio Kidd. Said, hey, do you know Jonathan over there? And I was like, he looks familiar, but I don't know that we've actually met. And we talked a little bit that time, and then I ended up signing up for one of your comedy classes there at Stand Up Live, which is one of the best things I ever did. I learned a whole lot throughout the course of the classes, but also just like I had always had always been like a one man thing for me. Like I would write the stuff and then I'd go off to a open mic somewhere. But like my first wife, I wouldn't run any of it by her. My current wife, I've never run any of it. She would see it on stage with everybody else. Like I wouldn't run it by anybody. Cause I always thought like, if I say this and she makes a face, then I'm never going to do it in front of a crowd. Like I said, I'm going to run with that first reaction. So getting to be there in a room with other like-minded people and getting to workshop things and all that was just, really super cool. But you guys worked really hard to develop a stand-up scene in Huntsville. So if we can go back to the very beginning of your fandom of comedy, for me, the first stand-up comedy that I remember seeing that it clicked with me, like, oh man, like this is something you can do, is watching Bill Cosby himself on Cinemax when I was a kid. And I've seen that probably 150 times. If
it's one of those things, if you're flipping through the channels and it's on, you're probably going to stop and watch a little bit of it at least.
Absolutely. So, at what point did you go from like, hey, I'm a comedy fan, I enjoy this, to where it clicked in your head like, hey, I got to do this. I got to figure out how to make this happen?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I was born in Chicago area and grew up in Chicago until I was a teenager. And early on, like we would have like school assemblies, and the touring group from Second City would come, and so like they would do improv as like a reward for like, the kids doing, well in school. They got to go to this assembly. And so I remember like that was the first like live anything I saw was the performers, improv people from Second City coming. And I don't even know who it was, but I'm pretty sure, I mean, back in the 80s, it could have been some people who wound up on like Saturday Night Live or something, Oh, yeah. But that, and then when I was young, I remember on, I think it's probably like HBO or one of those channels, Andrew Dice Clay had a comedy special out at that time. And I was over at like my aunt's house, and I remember them watching it and then going like kind of telling my mom, like trying to do like some nursery rhymes to her, that I'd seen. And she's like, no, you can't watch that, And so I would always, because it was like forbidden to watch it, I would sneak downstairs while my parents were sleeping and put it on or try to watch, Robin Williams or whoever was on, HBO or whatever. And so that was like very early on that I wanted to do that. And then I remember my 10th birthday, my family asked me what I want to do for my birthday. And I was like, I want to go to a comedy club. I want to go see whoever. I didn't care who was there. I just want to go to a comedy club.
Right.
And so they called up Zanies in Chicago and were like, hey, we want to make a reservation, large group for a birthday. And like, oh, that's great. And then they were like, all right, cool. So we're going to need this many tickets. And, it's our nephew's birthday. He's going to be 10. They're like, oh, no, he's got to be 18 to get in. So that kind of ruined that whole plan. So, so I went from, wanting to be going to see a show at Zanies when I was 10. I, obviously had to wait a lot longer, but eventually found my way to be on stage at Zanies. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, definitely. So started out in Chicago. How did you land in Huntsville?
My parents got divorced and my mom remarried. And then my grandmother lived in Alabama, in North Alabama, and she was kind of having some health issues. And so we moved here. We moved to like Hazel Green, Tony, like north of Huntsville, right. Little suburb towns. And we lived there, from the time I was like 13 until, I was an adult. And then I moved around a little bit after that. But during the time, people kept telling me, hey, you're funny. You should be a comedian. You should do something funny. I used to like get my parents' video VHS recorder and set it up and do like little funny commercials and skits and stuff and stuff like that, just acting silly. But it was one of those things you said, like, you could do this as a living. I never actually thought like you could do it as a living. Like I couldn't grasp that concept of like, how do I do this? Because like what's expected of me as a kid going to school and everything was, you got to go get a good job, go to college and all that kind of stuff. And didn't even realize that like the world of entertainment don't necessarily have to do that. And how do you get into it? So it took me a while to find my way around it and get into it. And then from there, I just kind of didn't look back.
Yeah, for me, like I had two loves. Like all my friends, they loved all kinds of sports, football and baseball and all this. And I never really gave a shit about any of that. And I was like a wrestling fan first and foremost. And then I loved comedy. And so when I started getting into high school, I was like, man, I would love to be a wrestler, but I'm not athletic in the least. But I found out about some local shows. I started going and I asked, like, hey, how do you do this? How do you get into this? And they're like, hey, you talk to that man right over there. And talked to a man named Sammy Hall. And I said, hey, I'd really like to be a manager because I just mostly like to run my mouth, and be a bad guy. And he said, well, come to this training school. And once I got there, I looked around the room and he's like, look, man, you're bigger than any of these guys. Like, is anybody really going to believe that you're their manager? He's like, do you want to do this? And I was like, if you think I can, yeah, I'd love to do it. It's all I've ever wanted to do. So I got into wrestling in like 1997 and did that for quite a few years. My first wife hated it. Got tired of fighting with her about it. So I kind of just moved away from it for a long time. I didn't do it. I still wrote like articles online and eventually started doing wrestling podcasts to kind of keep my toe in the water back in 2007 when it was just me, Colt Cabana, and maybe two other people before everyone who ever put on a pair of tights had a fucking podcast.
Yeah, or before Conrad took them all over.
Before Conrad brought back every wrestler that ever wrestled and made a podcast with them. But anyway, my ex-wife didn't want to go to wrestling shows, but she did like comedy. So I was like, yeah, I've always wanted to do that. I'll go to open mic night at the Stardome. And that's what kind of got me going. And the very first night I went, met Cassio Kid that we mentioned earlier, and he actually had went to school with some people that I worked with, and so it kind of gave us an in. And I kind of did it off and on for years, starting like say in 06. I would do it for a little while, then my work schedule would shut me down, and I wouldn't do it for 2 or 3 years, and eventually, years later, here I am at Stand Up Live in your class. But
yeah,
so tell us how we got from, something that you enjoyed, like, or let me back up before we get too far into that, because this was a moment for me, because like people would tell me, kind of like you said, hey, people say you're funny, because oh, you're funny, you should do that. Okay, well, what a lot of people don't understand, and it don't matter how great a stand-up comedian is, like, you don't just go up on stage and be funny. I mean, there's some, like Dave Chappelle will go be on stage for 5 hours without really writing anything, but he's a different animal. But I mean, you're not just, you can't just go up on stage and be funny. There's a ton of work that goes into it. So that's my next question, is at what point did you start to grasp, oh, this is what you got to do this, like, and there's structure to these things. There's a method, and there's all sorts of work that goes into it that a lot of people don't understand.
Yeah, I mean, for me, probably, when I was a teenager, I was trying to figure stuff out, figure out where I was going to do with my life. And, I kind of did want to do something in entertainment, but I wasn't sure what. And part of me, I wanted to be a rapper, and I wanted to produce music. And so I, try to figure out how to start my own like music studio. And so I even went to a bank and tried to get a loan when I was 17 to start, start a music production company. And the guy there at the bank was real nice. He didn't, make fun of me too much. You just like, here, you're too young, but there are grants and things you can help with. And then that kind of went nowhere. And then a friend of mine was kind of into doing wrestling. So we went and did some backyard wrestling at an event in Harvest, Alabama. And I was 17, and this basically in a big impound lot. It wasn't a ring or nothing in sight, but we did backyard wrestling. There's a video of it somewhere, I'm sure, floating around. And I got my nose busted open with a garbage can. And that's a fun thing. And then after all that, I was like, you know what? I'm just funny. I write stuff down. I was writing down raps, and they were funny. And so I was just like, maybe I'll just take some of these ideas and turn them into jokes. But it took me from, when I was probably 17, 18 years old until I was in my mid 20s before I actually got on stage the first time to do stand up. And throughout that whole time, there were like coworkers who were like, hey, you should go, there's a guy who works here that does open mics, and he travels to Nashville and Chattanooga and Birmingham. And I was just like, man, that doesn't sound like fun. Why would I want to drive 3 hours to go do stand up to, a room of people who are indifferent mostly, because it's just a bar that open mics happening at. Like, I kind of understood the grind before I actually got into it. And then finally, we were like, hey, let's get something going in Huntsville. So we started, I had a notebook with jokes, and I started getting serious about writing down, I had what I thought was like 10 or 15 minutes of material. It was actually like 5, and went to my first open mic and gave it a shot. But that's pretty much it. I mean, you do have to come up with the ideas and write them down. There are people who can go up there and just be silly and be funny, and it works, but you do have to kind of put some thought into it. And then, I chickened out the first time. The first week we went, a couple of my friends went up and did the open mic in Huntsville. And then I backed out, and they're like, nope, you're coming back next week and you're going no matter what. So I went back and did it, focused on a couple people in the crowd, got some laughs. I was happy about it. And then just never stopped, just kept going.
Something else I don't think people appreciate about that's tough with stand-up is like, because everybody's like, well, my friends think I'm funny and my family thinks I'm funny. And it's like, well, your friends, your family,
right.
know what they think is funny. You know how to make them laugh. And so I started doing those open mics at the Stardome. You would have very different crowds from, week to week. And so you go and just kill one week and then just get crickets with almost the same material. But although I was stubborn at the time, like I was trying to go up and do new stuff every time I went, because I'm like, I did that shit last time, I'm not doing it again. But then I would look over there and Cassio's doing the same stuff every time, but it's getting better each time. It's getting a better reaction each time.
Yep.
But yeah, there was one, like the people I worked with, we had all these funny stories from retail, and they're like, hey man, go up and do those. They'll do well. People can relate to that. And I was like, okay. So I didn't prepare anything else. I just did like 5 minutes worth of these funny retail stories we did. And I mean, I went up and did like 3 and just ate shit. I mean, people were just staring at me, and I thought, and it clicked while I was standing on stage. I was like, oh, they're on the wrong side of this. Like,
yeah,
they're the people that as the butt of these jokes. But I didn't have anything prepared. I hadn't done my other material enough to really have it memorized. So all I knew was bad guy wrestler. So I just start Don Rickles of the freaking crowd, just like cutting promos on people in the crowd, which, I mean, that didn't go over well at all. Like, I got on stage and the club owners were like, what the hell was that? Like,
yeah,
what are you thinking? But, and that's when I started thinking, like, man, when I write these jokes, I've got to consider, is this going to be funny just to men or just women or just white people or just black people or just like, everybody's got to be able to relate. And that's a whole nother level of difficulty that, you have to consider. And even now, like when I go down to Anniston, depending on like the first night I went down there, the act for the night, because what they do is they'll have a show and then afterwards they'll do an open mic almost every show that'll go up. You can just freaking go up. So they had a magician there. So very uptight, non-comedy crowd there to watch this magician. And then the guy that went up before me was like this black comic from Atlanta. And he's just like, F this, N-word that, and like just the most vulgar shit you've ever heard. And they're all just sitting there like horrified,
Yeah, man.
And so I went up and did my stuff, and it did good. But then like I went back the next week, totally different crowd, totally different reaction. But that's kind of what makes it fun, though,
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of like, you're going to go through a lot of that in your stand-up journey, or anybody who's thinking about doing stand-up that's watching this. You can't really think about it in the sense of, what if they don't like me going into it, because you already have like a defeated attitude. You got to go in there and be like, okay, what's going to take to make these people laugh? And, writing the material is one thing, but also, there's different parts of it. It's not just the written material. It's the stage presence. It's, your demeanor on stage. If you're doing a character, is it going to appeal to a wide variety? Is it a niche thing? And all that kind of thing. And so what I tend to try to say is just be likable. Like, be likable as possible. And if you're in doubt, the easiest target to make fun of that you won't offend anybody else is just make fun of yourself. So even starting out, like, to warm a crowd up, like what I noticed through time watching other comics, do sets and at a higher level, a lot of them start out by making fun of themselves in some way. And I do the same thing for the most part. And start out with a couple jokes, like poking fun at me. Don't dig into the crowd too much. If they give you a reason to, and you got to try to recover, then you take someone down, but that's usually far and few in between, because they're all there to have fun. And as long as you're getting them to laugh and have a good time, they forget about everything else. So, yeah, I mean, there's definitely, you can see things go south pretty quick. And then also, like, there's a difference between doing a bar show and those crowds versus doing like a comedy club, like a Zanies or somewhere like that. The crowds are going to be a little bit different in the sense that, if you're coming to Zanies, you probably paid, or any comedy club, you probably paid a good amount of money to go to get in. You got to buy a couple food and drink items. You're spending a good amount of money to be there. And so you don't want to mess up the night for anybody else. You're just there to have fun. If you're at a bar show, sometimes, especially open mics, they don't even know that there was supposed to be a comedy night that night. They're just there to get drunk and have a good time with their friends. And you may have just ruined it for them or interrupted it. And so they're just going to, give you hell. So you just got to win them over as quickly as possible, or be ready to do a heckler takedown if they start messing with you during your set. But I've seen it go both ways. I've seen comics go up their first time and just completely crush. And then I've seen people just crash and burn. And it takes a little bit of all of it. Also, another thing I'd say is, in doing this, you're going to bomb sometimes. Like, you can't be scared of it. You won't appreciate the good times on stage unless you have some bad ones. So just go up there, take it all in, be up there to do your time and work on your material. Sometimes you're not even working on the jokes. You're working on your stage presence, how you hold the mic, stuff like that. And then, like you said, you saw Cassio doing some of the same material. He may have been working on another aspect of his set, or, trying timing or something. There's a lot of different things you can work on.
Yeah, that's something I started paying attention to. It was like, well, he's doing the same material, but he's doing it a little different than last time. And I started paying attention. I was making a point to watch his every time, and he'd add a line, take this away, change how he said, the inflection,
change the order.
Yeah, it's a lot of different things to consider. And like, I'm hoping at some point to maybe, because we don't really have any kind of comedy here in Gadsden. They've tried it a couple of times over the years, but I'm hoping maybe later in the year to maybe, get a mic started somewhere, because I got some bars downtown and different things, and or maybe a showcase or something like that. And so you've had a hand in getting some shows off the ground in different places. So I was going to ask you some advice for me or anybody watching this of how to approach a venue and how to get something like that going.
Yeah, I mean, so as far as how things went for me and starting to do actual stand-up, we went and started doing I started at this open mic downtown Huntsville called Humphreys, and they had just a regular open mic night. It was a night for musicians, or they had a hypnotist who was there, and the magician, all that kind of stuff like you're explaining. They had a little bit of everything. And to get started, we were just like, okay, well, there's 6 of us, and we want to do 5 minutes of comedy each. Just give us a 30-minute block. That's the comedy portion of the show. We would like buy the host a shot of tequila and thank her for giving us the time and everything, and then just learn. We were all just learning. We were all brand new, and because there wasn't anything dedicated in Huntsville at that time.
Right.
And then so we did that for a few months, just crashing regular open mics and music open mics and doing it, and we got pretty good reception. But then you could tell like the musicians were like, oh, the comedy people are here, that kind of thing. So we kind of quickly learned we need to try to find a place where we can just have comedy, a comedy night, and that would be the open mic. And then we found a room at Flying Monkey Theater at Low Mill in Huntsville, which let us book their theater. It's like a 350-seat theater. We would do a show there once a month. But this is all while we're learning. But approaching them, you just want to think of it as a business owner's standpoint. And that's one of the biggest reasons why we had success with the Huntsville comedy scene, I feel like, is because I treated it like it was a business from the beginning, and how we did things with marketing and getting the word out to people about the shows, and then, how we ran the shows and things like that. But the main thing is, make it make sense for them. If you're going in to approach a bar, kind of go there a few nights before you actually even talk to anybody. Just kind of hang out, buy you a drink, sit there, get you a burger, whatever they got on the menu, get to know some people, see what they got going on throughout the week, ask some questions. There's probably a night out of the week that's a little slow for them, that maybe they've tried some things and things haven't worked, and maybe say, hey, would you be willing to try comedy, And whether it's an open mic or, they give you some money for it, and so you can pay some established comics to come up, or you can do a version of it where it's booked with established comics and then the open mic kind of thing. Right. That you just basically want to put yourself in their shoes. Would you give this person, a couple $100 to let them do a show in your venue in the hopes that it brings in some new customers, or the old customers will stick around and still buy drinks and all that kind of stuff. So that's the main thing, is just kind of check the place out, case it, see what's going to work. And if it doesn't work, don't shit on them. Sometimes it ain't for everything. You just got to shrug it off and go on. We had some growing pains where we had shows get canceled early on. And some of the comics kind of took it personal and would try to defend. Like me personally, I had a show that got canceled because one of the comics was too vulgar, and some people complained. And I was like, okay, that's fine. We'll, pick up and move on somewhere else. But some of the other comics took offense to it and started trolling them on their social media and calling the bar and hanging up and all that kind of stuff. And it just kind of gave us a bad rap, gave me a bad rap. I had to explain, I didn't put anybody up to this. They're doing it on their own. I'll talk to them, try to get them to stop, that kind of thing. But just take it as it goes, man. Don't take any no or setback like that personal, and just know that there are other opportunities in comedy. There are a lot of opportunities.
And early on, and we were talking about this before we started recording. Just the key in the beginning, if you're watching this and you're trying to get started or you're already started, is the biggest thing is just that stage time. Anywhere you can get it. And that's kind of what I'm wanting. That's my only real motivation for trying to do that, is just to create some stage time that I don't have to drive a long way.
Right. And that was, for me, I told you in my story, people were telling me, yeah, drive to Chattanooga, drive here and do, an open mic. And I was just like, no, I'm not having that. You know what I mean? It being in your backyard is way more convenient and will help you, be consistent and do it, even if you're the one who has to take the initiative and run it. It is a lot of work, and just you have to be ready to go for it and dig in. I think you're gonna come across a lot of people in this process. You're gonna come across people who are there doing it just for fun, that maybe on a whim. You got people who are going to try to take it serious and try to make a career out of it. And some people just don't know, just they're having fun. And that's fine. Whatever the reason is, it's good. It's good reason to get up there and make people laugh. I mean, I tell people all the time, they tell me, hey man, I've been thinking about, going and doing some comedy. I was do it, go find a place. And if there's not one already set up, find a coffee shop, hit a regular open mic and just do 5 minutes, and figure it out. So
that's the biggest thing, is just to go do it. Because I spent, like I said, I started in 2006, but I had pondered for years, I think I'm going to go do that sometime. And then, you just never do. And then in between now, like that's the biggest thing I regret is like, I wish I'd have done it a lot more consistently. Because the one thing that, as far as the wrestling side of it goes, I've promoted wrestling shows, so I know about, what it takes, how much work does go into promoting a show of any sort and dealing with people involved on both sides of the people you're booking, the crowd, the venue, and all that sort of thing. And it really helped me as far as like, I never had any stage fright of any sort. I mean, once you've gone out there and you've been in front of, 700 people who hate your guts and want to kill you, it's not a huge deal to go out there and hope somebody laughs. So, because, everything I've ever, because I've read every book I can get my hands on, listened to every podcast I can find and all that. And everybody's like, man, you got to go do 3 or 4 open mics every night of the week for years to get anywhere. I'm like, dude, there's not one anywhere close to me every night of the week. So,
yeah,
that's not going to happen. But, I feel like I'm used to being in front of people, so I don't have that to overcome at the very least. And everything I've read and, like I say, and taking your classes helped me understand, structuring, jokes and actually coming up with material. So most everything that I've tried recently has worked pretty well. So I'm pretty happy with that, because I've been surprised at how many people that's been doing this for a really long time are just kind of seemingly up there just winging it, like there's no joke there. Like, they're trying to be funny, they're acting goofy, but there's not a joke to be had. And that's like the first night I went and performed down there, like the club owner, like, how long have you been doing this? I'm like, off and on for years, but like with no consistency whatsoever. And he's like, well, like, you've got, like your jokes are structured. They're like, like professional material. I'm like, oh yeah, I'll study the shit out of it. Like, if I'm going to do something, I don't half-ass it. I'm going to try to do my best at it. I was like, it's probably never going to make me any real money or anything like that. 'Cause that's something else where wrestling and comedy are parallel, is when you start out in wrestling, you don't make shit. You go in the hole to go, get experience. And the same with comedy,
Yeah. It's a lot of grinding, a lot of, especially if you're being the person who's booking or promoting, you're going to be in the negative for a while, probably. I mean, you'll get some good shows here and there that, you're able to pay everybody, all the comics well, compensate yourself for, what you put into it. And plus, pay for any of your, advertising, that kind of stuff. But to think that, you're going to make enough to just live off of, it's, probably not going to happen for a while, unless you get a really sweet situation. And I say that, and I've seen comics who, 19 years old, they, straight out of school, and they're funny people, and they get after it, and they start doing open mics and work their material, and they start networking really well. And next thing you know, they're on Comedy Central in like 2 or 3 years. It happens, but that's the exception, not the rule. It's usually not the case. Then the ones that do it, more power to them, because they actually, I know they had to go through a pretty strong grind to get to that point. But yeah, I mean, the whole process can get you down sometimes. I've seen, some of the people, I'll say the funniest people I know don't even do comedy anymore, just because they get burned out from it, or things in their life change, things like that. And
Yeah.
it happens, but I say anybody who wants to do it should give it a shot. And I owe everything I have in my life to comedy, actually. I mean, I would say from the point when I started doing comedy, things in my life started turning around for the better. And, I'm married to a woman that I met at a comedy club, so I got that going for me. And that's a big positive. I know my position now working, with Jelly Roll, one of the big things why I got the jobs because I worked at a comedy club, which, that's a whole nother thing to go from being a comic to helping run a comedy club. But that experience helped me get to where I am now, and so I'll still probably always do stand up, but just because I'm so busy with a lot of the other things, I haven't had a chance to really do it at the level that I used to. I used to be on stage damn near every night of the week, sometimes 2 and 3 times a night, different shows, and all that slows down, but I don't regret any of it.
But that's a really cool element of your story that I didn't know until tonight, was the fact that originally, you wanted to produce, rap videos and have a hand in that. And then you ended up taking, you went around to the comedy and got back to what you wanted to do to start with. I mean,
yeah. I mean, in a way, I mean, I wouldn't know the first thing about producing a record, and musically, I'm not musically gifted at all. I was intrigued by what they do. And still am. I love sitting in the studio and watching them and how they, do all that stuff. But I wouldn't know the first button to press to make it happen. And it'd probably sound like dog crap if I did. But I can tell like when a song's really good, that kind of thing. So, yeah, I mean, it's cool to be like, yeah, that's what I wanted to be when I was 17, part of the music industry. And then found my way through comedy. And then back here, it's all entertainment, though. It's all just like wrestling. It's all part of the entertainment industry, and I've met people I never thought I'd meet. I've done things I never thought I would do. I'm in the bonus round as far as I'm concerned in my life. And, if it all were to stop tomorrow, and, I can't regret any moment of it. I've had a good run. So happy with it.
That's awesome. So, just to touch on a little bit, like you said, you worked in management at a comedy club for quite a while. Being on that side of the fence, did any of that, seeing the business side of comedy, did it change your perspective any, or even change your opinion on things, or was it just unique to get that perspective and it was helpful?
You know how, like, I don't know, that I've talked to people who like work at certain restaurants, and once they work there for a while, they won't eat at that restaurant anymore.
Right.
It's kind of like that for me. I've loved comedy, and I still do. And, I love the performance side of it. I also love the business side of it. And that's something I was actually pretty good at, doing the business side of promotions and marketing and booking and all that kind of stuff. And it was something that, I never thought I would stop doing. But some situations come up, and you work with certain people that you just don't get along with. And, you just eventually say, hey, I can't do this anymore. I just got to go my own way. And that's what happened. And because of that and a lot of circumstances behind it, I've kind of just put comedy at a little bit of a distance while I focus on this, next chapter doing the music stuff. And it's been the best thing for me, honestly. Like, I still have friends in comedy, comedians who I'll talk to every day, and, still throw ideas out there for jokes, and they'll run some by me here and there, or give them tips for booking shows, things like that. But I say that I don't go after it as hard as I used to because of my experience and seeing how the backside of things go on a larger scale, and seeing how some deals are, there's a lot of stuff behind the scenes that people don't know about. They just know, they show up and they laugh, and then there's a lot more to it.
And we're not gonna dive into the negative side.
No, I won't. That was more like a personal, like, in my situation, it was like a conflict of me and another individual, and that individual is no longer even part of comedy anymore. So I shouldn't, even let it be a point to where I'm not into it as much because of that. But it was something that definitely affected me. And so it did change, my look at certain things, but I still love it,
man. I mean, any business you're going to be in, people are going to be a factor, unfortunately. But no, where I was going with that is just who's your favorite person that you got an opportunity to work around during that time. Not to the reason I led with we're not going to say anything negative is most people are going to be like, who's the biggest asshole you met? You know?
Oh yeah.
We're not going to go there. But like, who even and it even surprised you because you really didn't know much about them or you only knew their comedy. But who's somebody that stands out as like, man, they were really super freaking cool.
Man, I've had the opportunity to work with quite a few people and that I've like done a weekend with or things like that I got to perform with. Probably Chris Kattan would be one that stands out for me. I did a show with him at Zany's and then a weekend with him in Huntsville at Stand Up Live. And I don't know. It was one of those things I see him on TV on Saturday Night Live growing up and I never thought I'd have opportunity to meet him, let alone just hang out with him for, 5 days in a row.
Right.
And he was a sweet guy, very personable, had some cool stories. And when the weekend was over, he's like, I kind of don't want to leave. I want to stay here. I was like, I want you to stay here with me too, man. This has been a lot of fun. Beyond that, I mean, Drew Lynch was super dope. Josh Wolf is another guy that's, even now, he moved here to Nashville for a little while and got to hang out with him at a bunch of his shows at Zany's, and you got to meet, him and Jelly Roll got to be good friends. So to see like some of those people that I knew and were super cool to me coming up, also be cool with Jelly and the connections they made. So that kind of stuff's pretty awesome.
That's cool. I'm sure I thanked you at the time, but like one cool thing, like me and my wife have always been like huge Dave Attell fans. And when he came to Huntsville, we took her to the show on her birthday. And you made sure that after the show, we got a chance to meet him and get a picture with him. And so that was like super cool. So if I didn't thank you for that at the time, I'll thank you now because that was of course, a really fun birthday for her and really, really cool experience. But I'm always late to the party on stuff. And so a guy who is big on the Nashville scene up there and has been for a while and even down in Huntsville, who I know the name, but like I just recently dove into listening to his podcast and watching his stuff is Dusty Slay.
Yeah.
What a funny guy. I feel like I'm like, how am I just now getting into his comedy?
Dusty's super cool. I've known him maybe like 9 years now, and we did a bunch of shows together coming up, and he's definitely coming into his own, getting some great recognition, which he deserves because he's always been super funny. And to see his growth, I kind of like when I was teaching the comedy class, I was kind of trying to steer people in a direction of like how he did it. You can't make someone copy everyone, but a lot of the things that I've seen him do or me and him have talked about over time, and like me and him have done writing sessions, groups together, and he's been there to help me. And just the way he comes up with material and stuff, I try to mimic some of that in what I was teaching in the class because he was definitely one person that you want to like kind of mold your career after and how way he's come up through the ranks. And now, he's on Netflix. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and that's why I brought him up, honestly, because I've been listening to the series of podcasts he made. It was like steps to getting into comedy.
Yeah. And
a lot of the things that he was saying, I've reflected back on, like, yeah, that's all stuff that Jonathan, and I thought it was similar. I'm like, them guys have to have been, have known each other pretty well. And then at one point, he really put over Huntsville, and like Epic Comedy Hour is one of the best independent shows comedy wise to go to.
Yeah.
So I thought, there it is.
Over this side, I got the Epic Comedy Hour poster. I used to help produce that show before the comedy club was there. And yeah, Dusty was definitely one of the guys who put up, and I performed with him on at Epic a couple times. And we would always try to bring him to town just because he was that funny. And he was in Charleston, and then he moved to Nashville once he was close enough. It was a 2-hour drive. We were like, hey, come on down anytime. We tried to put him on shows. And then, he built his way up from that to, being a feature act for a lot of comics and traveling and doing that, making good money, and then, making an actual career out of it. And then from there, he started headlining. And I'm so happy to see it all taken off for him because it's been fun to watch.
Oh yeah, and it's like I say, you know, I don't know him, but you can just tell listening to him. He's a good guy and super funny. You know, unique perspective on things. So I really
I mean he's from Alabama originally, you know, so that's a cool thing. And you know, grew up in trailer parks and has a unique perspective and some funny stories from it. So it's pretty fun to hear, you know, his stories and how he makes fun of some of those experiences he had growing up.
And I loved hearing that his "we're having a good time" is not just a catchphrase he came up with, but it was actually something he started doing when he was bombing, and then it just kind of worked and it evolved from that.
Yeah,
I don't know. I love when people. I mean, people come up with catchphrases a lot of times just because they're marketable, but I always like to hear when there's one that, you know, kind of was genuinely, just kind of evolved genuinely, but it works that well. But
yeah, there was a comic here in Nashville, and his catchphrase was "Tang Tang Ring Ding," and it was like basically how Dusty goes, "We're having a good time," so you know that's the end of the joke. He would say that at the end of all his jokes when people wouldn't laugh. You know, he'd say that. It's just a funny thing. And so when Dusty started doing the, you know, "We're having a good time," he's like, I hope he doesn't think I'm like stealing his thing. I was like, well, just talk to him about it. You know, just tell him, you know, I'm traveling. You know, it's a funny thing like to do at the end of the thing. Like, we're having a good time, you know, whatever, put the hand up. Yeah. And he talked to the guy. I was like, no, that's completely different from what I'm doing. So, you know, keep doing it, you know? So that's one of the things in comedy. You always want to be kind of mindful that you're not stepping on someone's toes. And some people have similar jokes or similar premises, and you don't want it to get out there that like you guys stole material or anything like that, because that's a big, you know, no in the comedy world. So I always say if you're not sure, just talk directly to the person and say, hey, this is where I'm coming from with it. Open those lines of communication. You never know. And a lot of times it's just like, no, you're good.
Yeah.
You know, simple as that.
There's only so many topics that everybody can talk about, and there's so many comics out there now that, I mean, people are going to cross over even, you know, unintentionally. So it's going to happen. But we're just about done. But it wouldn't be a Gene Jackson podcast if we didn't talk a little bit of wrestling. So,
all right.
Another cool thing that you helped me out with is you got me the hookup on being a seat filler at the AEW Dynamite show in Huntsville when they were here. And that was cool. I mean, we got to see the show from all over the building as we moved here, there, and everywhere. And some pretty cool stuff went on that night. Didn't see Dynamite tonight because my wife got off work right at 7, and I was getting ready for this.
And they changed the other station.
Yeah. Tonight was the first one on TBS, but I got it recorded, so I'm going to go back and watch it. But what's been your thoughts on recent happenings in AEW? All the new faces that have turned up in recent.
You know, I think that, you know, there being, you know, a major network that has wrestling on it other than WWE and USA Network and, you know, what they've been doing also, you know, on Fox and everywhere else they are. But I think having some kind of competition, whether Vince McMahon wants to admit that it's a legit competition at this point or not, it's good. It's good for, you know, the world of wrestling. And it's cool because a lot of people that I was exposed to people when AEW started that I wasn't aware of that were in the independent wrestling circuit and, you know, came up and now, you know, I'm a fan of them, you know, like, you know, Paige is one of them, you know, he's super cool. I'd never seen him before until AEW, you know, I didn't follow any other wrestling closely enough, but definitely a huge fan of his. And it's just been fun. I think it's good for it. I do worry though that, they might be biting off a little more than they can chew with all these signings. They kind of just need to chill with some of that. I think that might be part of Vince McMahon's strategy because that's how he took down WCW, was just letting other wrestlers go.
Throwing people in their direction.
Yeah, so I see a little bit of that strategy, I feel like, starting to play out. But, you know, there are other, you know, you got other wrestling organizations out there too that are picking up some of these people and it's benefiting and they're starting to level up too. So that's cool. I mean, it'd be great to see 3 or 4 different, you know, what you say, maybe big time players, you know, having networks, you know, shows again. So that's something I look forward to.
Back when I was a kid, or even when I was in college, when you had WWF, WCW, and ECW all, you know,
right,
strong at one point. I mean, And that was the thing is like people make it out to where it's like, you're either you're one or the other. Like, dude, we watched all that shit. We flipped back and forth between Raw and Nitro. We watched ECW wherever we could find it. And like, I really don't think there's that many people, nowadays that really just watch one or the other, which honestly, and I'm not just trying to be that guy, but like I have, other than like WrestleMania and SummerSlam and Royal Rumble, like I really haven't watched much WWE at all in the last couple of years. Like, and it is crazy. Like all the people, even like today, they released, Road Dogg and William Regal and Scott Armstrong and all these people. And it's like, who expected Bray Wyatt to get, released?
Yeah. I mean, some big names, guys who had good, that were over. And,
and they invested a ton of time and money in.
Yeah. And I mean, it was for me, I try to watch Royal Rumble every year just because that's always been one of my favorites, and then after that, they just really got to hook me with something for me to keep watching it. And I don't want to say I'm kind of giving up on WWE, but I don't know, man. It's tough for me to watch it now. And I don't watch AEW all the time, but I'm more likely to watch AEW than I am WWE at this point.
Yeah, I ain't gonna lie. I went along, like the only thing I was watching was old stuff on the network there for quite a while, because I couldn't get into any of the wrestling when there was no crowd. You don't realize how much of a difference the crowd makes until you watch AEW or WWE with no crowd.
Yeah, that made it weird.
And I guess I don't know, a lot of people know this about me that know me well, but like I was always a huge CM Punk fan, and so when he came back, I'm like, well, we had to pay for Sling so I could start back watching, because other than that, I was watching what I could find on YouTube. And I watched, started back watching it again. I've been watching it semi-consistently, and I ain't thrilled with how they've used Punk so far. I mean, I love the MJF stuff. I think MJF's probably the best heel in wrestling in the last 15 years.
Yeah.
But I don't know. A lot of it's I don't know. Like I say, WWE's done some really weird stuff these last couple of years where you're just scratching your head going like, maybe they are selling. Maybe Vince is getting ready to put this thing down and sell.
I do, man. I think that might be in the very near future. I mean, he's, just the fact he took over NXT from Hunter and, kind of demoted him a little bit, and then now he's changing the look of it and then laying off some of the bigger people who had hands and making it what it was. NXT was the most exciting thing about WWE for a while.
NXT is like a plane that the pilot is flying it directly into the ground on the stuff they've done with it in the last 6 months. Like, what are we doing?
Yeah, it went from being like the coolest thing they had going for them to be like, oh man, they're just tanking this thing on purpose right now to run the stock down or something. I don't know what they're trying to do, but
because would get these guys over in NXT, and they would get over. They'd have these amazing entrances, and I mean they'd be over like $1 million, and then they would go to Raw. This guy after Ricochet and Aleister Black, and just one right.
And then he'd like change their name, like, oh, it's a different guy now. His name's a little different than what it was. Why even change it? Just go with it.
So I don't know, man. Like this year was the toughest WrestleMania. Well, last year's was pretty rough too.
With no crowd was the worst.
The one with no crowd was the worst. But even this year's it's like, whew, even with the crowd, this is still pretty rough. And then SummerSlam, So
definitely.
This was the first year. Like I've been watching it since they started in '87. This was the first year I just didn't watch Survivor Series. I was like, no, can't do it. Like I just no.
Yeah, I'm definitely more of an old school. Like back then, 80s, 90s, even like right up to 2000 was probably when I was more serious and watching a lot of wrestling, and then kind of gave it a break around, 2001, and then got back into it around 2010, 2011, somewhere around there. So I took about 10 years break in there, not really keeping up with it.
And didn't miss shit. You
didn't miss it, nah.
Didn't miss a damn thing.
Not really. So I'm happy with that decision. I was, I had the network. I was able to go back and watch some of that stuff, get caught up on some of the things, but then I was able to pick and choose what I really wanted to see. So that made it better.
Yeah. The network, and I mean, I guess now being on Peacock, but That's one of the best things they ever did. Cause yeah, I love going back and watching, the older stuff, even like the world class and some of that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And some of that I watch it now. I'm like, oh, that's not as good as I remembered it to be.
Right. I used to like, I used to like when WCW would come to Von Braun Center kind of pretty often there for a while in the 90s. And I would go to a lot. I don't think I missed a single one of the Nitros. And I would go back when it was on the network and watch the show that I was at and see if I remembered, because it was just a fun thing to see. But yeah, I definitely went back and watched a lot of those old Nitros and Raws and all that kind of stuff. And then, like you said, the territories were fun to watch, and just the way they cut promos back then were even different, and you actually believe, even now as an adult, I believe the stuff they're saying with conviction. They say it and deliver it in such a way that you're like, this is really happening. The promos are cutting, so
yeah.
That's something that maybe, some of these newer wrestlers could go back and try to watch some of those and learn to be a little bit more convincing, because that's one thing I think is missing in wrestling. There's some that still do a great job, but it's not.
And that's why they stand
relevant.
out,
Yeah.
Bryan Danielson and Punk and guys like that, you watch their stuff, you're like, wow, okay.
Even MJF.
MJF.
Yep.
Well, all right, man. I appreciate you doing this. I really do. Like I say, I know you don't have as much spare time as you once had, so for you to take the time to do this, I really do appreciate it, man. And thank you for everything you've helped me out with over the years.
Man, I appreciate you just reaching out to me and having me on here. It's been fun just catching up with you, and anytime if I'm available, I'd love to come back and chat some more. Maybe we just do wrestling again. I mean, who knows?
Absolutely.
And talk more about that. But I appreciate it, and it's my pleasure to reach out and do the teaching that I did at the comedy club when I was doing that. And to me, that's my legacy, is to help the future tier of all the comics coming up and all those kind of people, whether they use it for comedy or public speaking or wrestling or whatever they choose to use it for. I know that part of what I taught in those classes has gone on for the better good of things. So that feels good.
Oh, absolutely, man. From day one, you could look around the room at everybody's face from the first day we started to the last day, and you could see things clicking for people, and you had a knack for giving analogies and examples. You could see it clicking in people's head, like, oh shit, yeah, it's like that,
like they've been studying comedy for a while, but they didn't catch that until they're actually broken down for them and told why things are certain ways they are and that kind of thing.
And like I said, man, it opened my eyes to a lot of things, and getting that feedback from other people, and that's one thing I'm hoping if I can get a mic or something going here in Gadsden, that I can hook up with some like-minded people. If for no other, even if we only do a couple shows that I can just hang out with and toss material back and forth.
Yeah, that camaraderie.
There's a few things I come up with that I had, and we all sat around the table and I threw it out there, and you're like, what about this tag? And this guy over here, what about that? And then we'd get to turn around and get to go same day and go up on stage and do it. And
try it out.
Instant feedback. And
that was something that directly from Dusty Slay. And so you were talking about that earlier. And Dusty used to do a writing workshop at Zany's, and it was like every Monday, the club would be closed. Comics would sign up. You'd limit it to a certain number of comics. You come in with your group, go up, do some material. They'd throw you some tags and punch it up a little bit, and you get to try it again with the new part added onto it and see how it feels. And I felt like that was important. So that's why I'm glad we did it that way, and that you gained a lot from it as well as everyone else.
Absolutely. Like I say, I've been looking to find a way to make that happen again, because it was super helpful. But,
awesome.
All right, man. I'll hit you up here down the line, and we'll get you back on here, and we'll talk some more wrestling and some more comedy, and I'll bring you up to speed and let you know how things are going for my friend Whitey Jenkins as we plug along.
Awesome, man. Thank you.
Right. Take care, man. All right, there you have it, Jonathan Craig. Great guy, funny guy, and man, he is making things happen with Jelly Roll. They're cranking out some awesome content. To see some of those videos he's talking about, just go and search Jelly Roll on YouTube. Check out some of those videos, because if it's anything he's done in the last 2 years, Jonathan had a hand in it. So check it out. Anyway, thank you for listening. We will be announcing real soon who my next guest will be here on the Jack's Interaction podcast. And meanwhile, tomorrow at 6 p.m., you can check out the Whitey Jenkins Show when his guest will be EPW referee Just Mike. So that should be really interesting. So check that out. And again, thanks for watching, and check out cheapheattvlive.com for all the different podcasts in the Cheap Heat TV Live network.